going on, folks? Grandison Shines here with...
Yasmin Marie. I was going to say Grandison Shines.
Not correct. Only one. One and only.
One and only, yes.
Absolutely.
How is everyone?
Hope everyone is doing well. We are making a video today. We decided to do this on the fly, and maybe we'll do something more formal, but we wanted to get this information out there about accountability. A lot of organizations that we integrate with have an issue with accountability. When they submit their leadership questionnaire, we really evaluate that and look for certain keywords. Confidence is one of those words that continue to come up. Leadership is a word that continues to come up. Communication, and finally accountability. So we want to make this video on accountability and really talk to you about what we do here at Seduire from a very high level standpoint and what makes accountability actually work in your organization. So we want to give you some free information, so grab a pen and grab a paper and we'll mosey on into this.
According to Grandison, data-driven accountability is the only accountability that truly works for progressive organizations.
Absolutely. Why do I say that? Because that's the only way you can really track information and have a reason for holding people accountable. A lot of times that phrase, holding people accountable, gets weaponized within the organization. And so what does that look like though? How do you reprimand somebody? How do you have this actually permeate throughout your organization? A lot of times they just talk about it and they don't really do anything.
They do. Well, how do you reprimand someone, or how do you
reprimand an adult, right?
Performance review.
Yes, exactly.
How do you review their performance? Well, I like the way they walk.
Yeah.
I like the way they talk. Really? Is that data driven? Is that even some? I mean, isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah, I mean, you have to ask yourself these questions, really. You have to ask yourself these questions from a high level. So we have come up with what we call data-driven accountability. Yeah. Today we're going to reveal to you the 6 points that make accountability work in your organization or any organization that you embark on here from now on.
Now, to instill a data-driven culture that teaches your employees to take ownership of their choices, behaviors, actions, and consequences, whether positive or negative.
Right. I want to hone in on this word culture. Accountability is a culture. If you have accountability in one area, it's really difficult to have it extend out to different areas in your organization. So one ecosystem, one department is good at accountability. It's very, very tough. So what has to become a culture? And culture is driven from where? From the head down, from the key stakeholders all the way down to the people at the front line. And that has to be accentuated throughout the entire organization. But again, the spearheads are those at the top. So it becomes this culture. So if you notice, like for instance, in your home place environment, if you have children, the parents are, of course, the head of the children, and you have the parents who have certain mandates or whatever, certain way you do things. It becomes the culture of that particular ecosystem. Well, an organization is the same way. So an organization is a live, living, breathing organism, an organization, and it's driven from the top down. Imagine one of your kids trying to instill accountability just in his or her room for having his or her room clean, and then trying to extend it out to everyone else. No, the parents mandate that, so the whole house ends up being clean. Well, take that analogy, permeate that over an entire organization. Now you have something that can actually work with accountability.
Absolutely.
So what do we have here? First we have, let's go into the information, get the cursor working right here, go into the information about the proven data-driven solution that makes accountability work in your organization. Experience more accountable employees across the entire organization.
So let me ask you this question. Why is it that certain organizations, and I've seen it mainly in small to medium organizations, that they haven't instilled the culture of accountability?
Because they like to just, from our experience, what we have seen is when you have a small organization, they like to have this very non-corporate-y, home fuzzy feeling type of organization. It's not, so there's not that much structure. So they allow people to do what they want to do in order to get the job done, without having some instilled processes that they haven't taken into consideration that when they grow, this is going to really get out of hand. So it just evolves that way.
And that's exactly what happens.
Exactly what happens.
Most of the organizations that we're coaching, that is one of the main problems. How do I instill that culture of accountability?
Yep, and it has to come from the top. So if you take a look at this graphic, people and culture are the center of every organization, and it has to start there. And then it goes over to the top right, a little bit over to the top right with the leadership development, the leadership team getting developed, trained, coached, and understanding how to permeate a mandate and or a message from the top of the organization and filter it down through all the layers of the organization to those who are frontline dealing with customers. And then you also have that integrated with processes, and a lot of times our processes are manual, but even more with tech systems, as you see to the left here. More and more tech systems have our processes in them, and you can actually have homegrown processes or ad hoc processes that you have in a system, I should say, an ad hoc system, a homegrown system that has some of your processes in there, where you can extract, again, the metrics and data out of those systems. So we have these 6 components that work together, and we're going to expound on these 6 components in the next few slides and really dive into it, but not too deep. If you have some questions, we'll just let you know where you can get a hold of us, how you can get a hold of us via our email and a number. All right? So let's continue on. Any other questions there?
No, I'm going to ask you the next slide.
All right, cool. All right, good.
So what makes data-driven accountability work in any organization?
Again, we stated there are 6 points in order to make accountability work. All right, so let's start with point number 1. First of all, you have to have the proper training and coaching. Both. If you have training, it could be for an extended period of time over a day, but then you also have the culture evolve through coaching, and it has to start from the top. So everyone from the C-suite all the way down to people who are at the front line of the organization have to be coached and trained. There's a minimum of the way we do it, 24 weeks. Now, what does that mean?
Grandis, and why?
There we go. I'm glad you asked that, Yasmin. Everyone in the organization has to, first of all, understand how to communicate with one another. Aside from accountability and leadership, everything else. Everyone in the organization has to understand basic, core, foundational communication principles.
And that doesn't mean just because you know how to talk,
that you know how to communicate. That's absolutely right. Just because you know how to talk doesn't mean you know how to communicate. Just because you're a leader does also mean that you know how to communicate. We always say that in our program. So 12 weeks we have in our program, minimum 12 weeks of basic communication concept, learning those. We understand why coaching, because we want to understand you know them. You can put them into action. We have a coach and do methodology. You get coached 1 week, you go out in your workplace environment, you do it, and you come back and report the results, findings, observations. From there, you also have a minimum 12 weeks of accountability training. Accountability, we also teach, is communication. But now you're starting to put all the processes, or our instilled process. We have these 7 words of how that sound like the accountability skill that you have to learn how to utilize properly in the conversation. So you have to get trained and coached. That's one aspect of it.
Why do they have to be trained and coached?
Because the training can come just to get that really high-level influx of information, data exchange, knowledge transfer really quickly. Then the coaching sets in and understand that, okay, now we really want to understand that you know how to communicate, you know how to utilize, especially the leadership team, especially the leadership team understands how to utilize the communication principles appropriately in order to get the results and influence they have over their subordinates. And
statistically, we have found out that they only retain 10% after 30 days.
Yeah. Exactly.
10%.
Yeah, so after all that training, this is why our program works with organizations and other ones don't. The training is, for us, is always accompanied with the coaching. Always. So you can get that influx of training. You can get that 2-3 day of training, 8-hour training, but guess what? A lot of information is going to be gone by the time 30 days hit, and you won't understand how to utilize it. It just becomes what they call shelf help instead of self-help. Everything on the shelf, right? All right, so that's one point. So you have to be coached and trained.
All right, the next one is the key performance indicators. A lot of people don't even know what KPI or key performance indicators are. And when we have addressed these organizations that we are currently coaching, we have to have them dig deeper as to what is the data that you have identified that makes a difference in your company. For example,
making sure that those metrics, like for instance, one example could be product and or product percentage or dollars. When you sell, what's your goal? Say high level. So those who are C-level executives, they're looking at bottom line, profitability, But that comes in two ways: percentage and dollar amount. Okay, that could be one of the organizational KPIs. Everyone's striving towards that number. Now it gets dissected, it gets permeated throughout the organization. Some departments may have a little bit higher stake than others, but that's an opportunity, and you have to make sure that all the KPIs are measurable. They have to be measurable. So the number is a good way to tie a measurable component to your KPI. We have identified 3 types of KPIs that you need to identify. 1, organizational KPIs for organizational accountability. Are we hitting our number from an organizational standpoint? Organizational KPIs.
The big picture.
Big picture across the whole entire organization. Everyone will utilize this as, say, for instance, redundancy. Everyone should have in your organization should have a redundant person.
Profit.
Yep, profit as well. They take you out of the process, or you go on vacation, or you're on PTO, somebody should be able to plug and play, knowing some of your skill sets to fulfill those duties. Should not stop within the organization, or that opportunity shouldn't stop. So, for instance, redundancy over an entire organization could be a KPI, and that can be measured and tracked and recorded. Then you break it down to the department level and or team level KPIs. Teams work projects, they work accounts, they have to have certain numbers and or other mandates that are measurable in order to sustain that particular client and or perform for that particular client.
Could be sales or
could be sales, that could be projects, could be the number of invoices that are driven towards, or it could be purchase, or it could be a number of things. This is where we work with organizations to dig deep and see what those KPIs are for that particular department. And then you get into individual KPIs. This is where a lot of organizations fail, to be truthful. This is where when you post an ad for that position, or you have an opening, you should write down, of course, the duties, responsibilities, and the overall general aspect of what that position entails. Those are the metrics that they should be measured against for their review. Their 90-day review when they get hired on, their yearly review also as well. They should have certain numbers in there, certain percentage points. It should be very extensive so that the person, by the time they sign and understand that this is their job description, those are the KPIs they'll be measured against on a year-to-year basis as long as they're in that position in order to get the raise or get promoted or do whatever that their opportunity is in the organization. So that gets skipped a lot within organizations.
It does, and some of the examples being their productivity, also attendance, and the way, time management.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those are some of the individual accountability KPIs.
Yes, and making sure that you have all that nuance for that particular position. And again, there's our 3 levels of KPIs in which you can utilize accountability. Third thing that we're going to talk about is process mapping, or having processes. Having processes scripted out will afford you to do some of the things we're going to talk about in the other points. But making sure that the process is laid out so when someone steps outside of that process and they don't do what they should do within that particular step of the process, then there's a reason for reprimanding and there's a reason for optimizing the process, that they have to continuously step outside. I believe processes should be constructed to where they're not so draconian that they're too rigid and you can't have any flexibility. You should be able to step outside of the process for maybe a little opportunity for a step or two and then go back in the process. But if you find that you have to continue to step outside that process at that point, of course it needs to be optimized there at that particular level.
And also, I have noticed that sometimes if you, as an organization, cannot identify what's broken in the process, bring somebody from the outside, consultants or another peer from another company. Well, that would be kind of a, what is that called?
Not good.
Not good.
But that would bring us. We help you with that.
Bring on a consultant to identify what the issue is.
Yes, exactly. But process mapping, having the process is important, which goes into the next point where certain steps in the process has certain documentation that goes along with it. One step may have a checklist. One step may have a sign-off. And that should be appropriated within the proper file management in some sort of system. In your process system where you have the process, should be able to pull that documentation, have you look at the checklist, fill it out, do whatever you need to do, and or electronically sign it. Hit submit, put it back into the system so that anyone who wants to look at the step of that process, make sure it's signed off. Somebody's QCing, make sure you did all the steps. Somebody's QCing, make sure they got the proper sign off. They can do that. You have to have that process management there, or the documentation and file management there. And then you get into that, making sure you have the appropriate tech system. That means that sometimes we go to organizations, we do a tech assessment. And that tech assessment is about, okay, are these systems talking to one another? Do you have the systems? Yeah, exactly. Are they up to date, or is this something that everyone has access to, or is it just in this particular silo, especially when an organization buys or purchases or integrates another organization in? They purchase another organization, next thing you know, they have all these disparate systems. And so you have to have the information that's available to everybody. And that goes along, again, with the documentation and file management.
Mm-hmm. And especially when you're working remote, that's really important.
Yes, really, really important right now, because a lot of companies, since COVID, post-COVID, have gone remote. And there's quite a bit of turmoil out there that we are hearing with people getting appropriate documentation and everything else. So, of course, systems have to be revamped. That's why we do a tech assessment. A lot of more organizations are going more remote. Absolutely, that's a very, very good point. So if you have remote employees, it's going to be even more so important that you have all of this opportunity going for you.
And accessibility.
And then finally, we come to the point that I feel is one of the most important. They all go together. So if I had to adjust, this one has a high potential, close to 10 of being on its level of importance, are the merits and demerits.
Explain merits and demerits. What do you mean? Is it kind of like the positive and the negative?
Yes, it is kind of the positive and negative. When someone does something good, how do you acknowledge? How do you give them merits? How do you give the kudos? You acknowledge in public, so you're making sure you document those small wins. That's what text is for as well, for recording purposes. But understanding that person deserves a merit there. If they continuously do good, do give them a reward. Mm-hmm. But also, consequently, if the latter happened, if the reverse happened, and they are not doing what they're supposed to do, and you can track it because they haven't adhered to the KPIs, they haven't met KPIs, they haven't gotten the right steps documented within the process, understanding the process, and know the documentation within the steps, then you can hold them accountable, slapping their hand somewhat. Hey, you're supposed to do this, I'm giving you a verbal warning. Number 2, it happens again. Hey, you're supposed to do this and this and this. Okay, now I'm going to give you a written warning. Here's what's going to happen next if you don't do it again, right? Always let them know, if you don't do this, here's what's going to happen at that point in time. Don't do it again. Hey, you know what? This is third time, grounds for termination. Whatever your process is, you have to get HR involved, whatever that process is, you must have merits and demerits. That's how you can hold people accountable within the organization.
You know, one of the companies that I worked for, they came up with these little stars. Mm-hmm. And when the C-suite individuals were out in the field, they caught somebody doing something right, great customer service, great sales, and they would put a pin on their lapel.
Yeah, see?
As a, you're the star.
A little acknowledgement.
And acknowledge them in public.
Yep. Reprimand in private. Acknowledge in the open, reprimand in private. That's always a good mantra which should instill within the culture for any organization, whether it's accountability or whatever it may be. Just go with knowing that. So these are the 6 points that make accountability work. The training and coaching, key performance indicators identified at all 3 levels of the organization or within the organization's 3 levels. Understanding how you have your process mapped and or processes integrated within your organization.
Grandison, could you give examples of some of the processes that could be broken?
Processes that could be broken. Let's say, for instance, for the lack of an example that we talk about, the use of the example that we spoke about is one of the ones for your performance reviews. Performance review. A lot of organizations has that one broken. Sometimes they haven't evaluated or given a performance review in a year and a half or 2 or 3. Or they haven't given anyone a raise or whatever. Yeah, it's one of the bigger ones. There are other processes like how do you submit an RFP? Do you have appropriate systems? Or are you doing a whole manual process? Or can we automate it? Understanding that the right tech systems and documentation can go along with that. So those are some of the examples of processes.
No, that's great. And the last three are documentation and file management, the tech systems, and the merits and demerits Granison's favorite.
Yes. Those are the 6 points that make accountability work. Here is some information on how to get a hold of us. Send us an email with the word accountability or data-driven accountability in the subject matter. We'll make sure we get back to you to come to us here at the organization. It gets in the right hands. Or here's the number you can give us a shout at 480-648-9011 or email us at info@seduireintl.com. I'm Grandison Shines here with
Yasmin Murray.
Until next time, folks. Talk to you later.
See you later.
Bye.